okay?
You got the okay.
Oh, thanks for coming, everybody. I started this time by looking at a lady and realizing how she fit in from here in Albion into a national idea. I said someday I'm going to do a program on all the nationally known people buried here in Orleans County, especially in Mount Albion. We had Betty Crocker's voice on the radio. The lady that did that is buried in Mount Albion. The man who drew Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse for Walt Disney was from here. He's buried in Mount Albion. And now we have a lady, Gertrude Corless, who was a political activist for Ireland in the 1920s, and she was from Albion. She was known nationally as an Irish activist. Like many cities along America's eastern seaboard, Boston experienced a massive influx of Irish immigrants during and after the Great Famine of the 1840s. In the decades that followed, New York was the home of the largest number of immigrants from Ireland. But Boston could boast that a greater proportion of its population was Irish-born than any other major city in the United States. By the turn of the century, 4 in 10 of Boston's residents either had been born in Ireland or had at least one Irish-born parent, and the Irish were the dominant political group in the city. They acquired and maintained this power in the teeth of fierce opposition from the host group, the Yankees, many of whom were descendants of the original Puritan settlers. They despised the Irish immigrants, Catholic beliefs, and still retained control of the city's economics institutions. Yankee-Irish rivalry intensified during the first 3 decades of the 20th century, which was a crucial period in the evolution of Irish ethnicity in Boston. Embodied by their ascendancy, Boston's Irish Catholic leaders, both political and religious, asserted a more self-confident identity, thereby further antagonizing the local Protestants. So we had a real upshot between Catholics and Protestants, American-born citizens, Irish immigrants. Sorry, I just got myself all discombobulated here. There was a deportation order. O'Brien worked to develop the Women's Irish Education League, founded in San Francisco in May 1919, before finally returning to Ireland. Before her final return home, O'Brien moved to the East Coast in 1920. There, O'Brien, Gertrude Kelly, and Gertrude Corless founded and ran the American Women Pickets for the Enforcement of America's War Aims. They challenged what American identity was about, and O'Brien proposed that it was as much about rebelling against British rule, thus trying to fight for Irish freedom back to the American Revolution. So they were a group that were very pro-Irish, pro-backing the Irish for their independence. The American Women's Pickets for Enforcement of American War Aims was a radical activist group formed in the 1920s. They protested British policies in Ireland by picketing the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. They notably picketed the British Embassy in Washington in 1920. They argued that British actions in Ireland violated the wartime principles of self-determination, which were part of America's own stated war aims during World War I. So they were saying the British had no right to go in and tell the Irish how they had to run things. Key figures in this were Dr. Gertrude B. Kelly, Kathleen O'Brien, and Gertrude Corless from Albion. The group engaged in or were associated with high-profile protests, including a strike at Chelsea Piers in New York, which was considered a significant political action. The group used the rhetoric of American patriotism and the Revolutionary War to push for Irish independence. Gertrude Corless was a journalist in New York City, a key leader and spokesperson for the American women pickets for the enforcement of America's war aims around 1920 to 23. Working with Dr. William Maloney and others, she organized protests, including picketing the British Embassy in Washington to promote Irish independence and combat British influence in the U.S. So we had an Albion girl in Washington protesting for the Irish. She served as the co-leader, organizer, and public spokesperson for the group. A New York City journalist with ties to the Hearst newspapers, she utilized her position to direct propaganda efforts for the Irish cause. The organization staged protests to pressure the U.S. government regarding foreign policy, specifically aiming to uphold President Wilson's war aims regarding self-determination for nations, applying that to Ireland. She collaborated with figures such as Dr. William Maloney, Kathleen O'Brien, and Dr. Gertrude Kelly. She was also involved in communication with government officials, including a request to President Harding regarding the Irish situation. So she was very involved. She was in the middle of everything and promoting everything. Her work was a part of a broader, well-organized propaganda campaign in the United States between 1916 and 1921. So she was obvious. She was in newspapers. She was in protests, or her name got listed in those protesters. She acted as a co-leader and primary spokesperson for the pickets, often directing propaganda efforts. So she was right there. She was in it, telling them what to do to get the attention. She was a journalist with ties to the Hearst newspaper. She and her group, which included Kathleen and Gertrude, targeted the British government's actions during the Irish War for Independence. In 1920, the group picketed the British Embassy and later in 1923 addressed the petition to President Harding. So her name is on those protests and those letters to Harding. She was involved in organizing protests, including leafletting from airplane, which was some newspapers reporting as bombing the embassy. She tried to get the promotional items handed out to people, and they stopped her. So she had a friend, a woman, who was an airline pilot.
Wow.
And so she got the pilot to take her brochures up in the plane. And the pilot flew over New York City and tossed out the brochures. So they were all coming down from the heavens. So I think she knew how to promote herself and her ideas. Mrs. Charlotte Depard, secretary of an Irish Women's Association for the Defense of Prisoners, sent a cablegram by way of Paris to Mrs. Gertrude Corless, president of the American Women Pickets for the Enforcement of America's War Aims, asking her to request President Harding's intervention in favor of the Irish Republican prisoners. The message asked that the president seek to obtain for the prisoners treatment in accordance with Geneva Convention. Mrs. Despard also requests that a mission be sent to Ireland from America to investigate conditions there. So these women were not nice little ladies who kept their mouths shut. They stirred things up. They asked questions, and they pushed for something to get done. Gertrude, she's also listed as a New York City journalist, activist, and leader of the American Women Pickets. In April 1920, she organized picketing at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. to protest British actions in Ireland and demand the repayment of war loans. She was in the newspaper. She was a leader and mentioned a lot in these actions from 1920 to about 23, 24. There's an article written about her, about this flying papers from the airplane. It was in the New York Times. Mrs. Thomas K. Corless of New York was the acknowledged leader of women pickets who paced in front of the British Embassy in Washington recently to protest against Britain's stand on the Irish problem. When police broke up the picketing by arresting some of the women, Mrs. Corless outwitted the officers by arranging to drop pamphlets about the embassy grounds from airplanes. So she even got written up in the New York Times as being the person who instigated this pamphlet dropping. Gertrude Corless, who shared a Washington hotel room with Ruth Russell, served as the picket's co-leader and public spokesperson. Notably, she had ties to the Hearst newspapers. In 1920, the Hearst newspapers backed the Irish envoy Harry Boland's scheme to generate anti-British sentiments in the United States. Corless was the private secretary of an editorial writer who penned pro-Republican editorials for the Hearst newspapers. As picket co-leader, Corless directed the production of such propaganda. So she was in the midst of it. She was involved in the propaganda. She helped to stir people to get it going. In 1920, they had the March for Erie. Women supporting the Irish Republican movement urged an end to U.S. aid to Britain in a march from the White House to the U.S. Capitol, April 1st, 1920. They were led by Mrs. Thomas K. Gertrude Corless, wife of the noted actor. The march was turned away from the Capitol grounds by the police, but some of the marchers later secured places inside the House and Senate galleries and disrupted proceedings by shouting pro-Irish statements. Okay, we've seen some of that today. Yeah. They're keeping those things going. A ceasefire was negotiated in July 1921 that ended the 2.5-year war between the Irish Republican Army and the Royal Irish Constabulary that was supplemented by the Black and Tans. A civil war followed from 1922 to 23 between supporters of the treaty that created the Irish Free State but left 6 counties under British rule, and opponents who favored a completely independent state on the island. Supporters of the Free State prevailed in the Civil War. So there was a lot of upheaval about whether Ireland would be a country or not, whether it was supported internationally, if people were behind this idea, if somebody was going to be there for them if they became a state and country. I think this one person wrote, I think journalism is key to understanding the involvement of Kathleen O'Brennan and Gertrude Corless in the picketing. O'Brennan was an Irish journalist and her family played an important role in the revolutionary movement in Ireland. She relayed select information about the pickets to reporters, emphasizing their Protestant faith and long family lineages in the United States in order to claim that people outside of Irish circles supported the Irish Republic. So you have to prove that you're definitely on their side. Gertrude Corless, who shared a Washington hotel room with Ruth Russell, served as the picket's co-leader and public spokesperson. Notably, she had ties to the Hearst newspapers. In 1920, the Hearst newspapers backed Irish envoy Harry Boland's scheme to generate anti-British sentiments in the United States. Corless was the private secretary of an editorial writer who penned pro-Republican editorials for the Hearst newspapers. As picket co-leader, Corless directed the production of such propaganda. So she was behind a lot of the propaganda, knew people who would write it up and put it out. She made things happen. There were newspaper articles, 33 strike pickets captured. Some were noted suffragettes. And also in this 29 were women. Miss Freeman and Miss Gertrude Corless and Miss Marguerite Remington Charter and about 30 strikers were pacing back and forth in front of the Shirtworth factory at number 310 6th Avenue. So she even got arrested as a protester in front of a shirtwaist factory. And the one I found yesterday when I was talking to some of the ones that work here is you can't see it, I'm sure, but it's a picture of protesters with signs. Okay, they're all women protesters. Women march for free Erin, carrying banners urging the abrogation of all treaties with England until the Irish Republic is recognized. A delegation of women from New York, Boston, Chicago, Baltimore, and Washington passed the White House and to the Capitol today. They were led by Mrs. Thomas K. Gertrude Corless, wife of the noted actor. So this group were led by an Albion lady in New York City, which I think is, pretty impressive. She was nationally known. She was born here. And by the way, she came back here and is buried here in Orleans County. I think it's quite something to have someone that obvious in national politics be from here and come back here. She is written up in, this is called the Gotham Center for New York City History, The Battle for the Irish Consulate. And this is a 18-page write-up. And in this, guess who? Gertrude Corless is mentioned, the lady from Albion. Corless, an American woman with considerable experience in organizing pro-Republican female protesters and showcasing them before journalists, accompanied McSweeney into the consulate. So she's written up in this, The Battle for the Irish Consulate, 18 pages worth. And this one is from an Irish blog. Women bolder than Maloney took over the picketing, extended it, and turned it into something more in line with the media stunts of militant women suffragettes. So the suffragettes were operating at this time too. But this group made themselves, announced that they were not suffragettes. They were working towards the land of Ireland. 2 days after the arrest, Molly Carroll, a young actress previously paid to picket by Maloney, generated a newspaper copy all over the United States by flying an airplane over Washington and dropping pro-Republican handbills all over the city. So those were handbills that Our Lady produced, and they found a way to distribute them. Headlines describing Molly Carroll's airplane leafleting as a bombing of the British embassy served to imply that the violence of the Irish War for Independence had come to the United States. So you can see that the publicity was there, just like it is today. If you look up in, like find a grave for Orleans County, you can find Gertrude's write-up. This, in Find a Grave, has a picture of her and the complete biography of her, like 3 pages worth. So if you look her up on Find a Grave, you're going to find all the information you want on her life and what she did and who she worked with and her family. and her husband. This was written up as her obituary in Albion. Gertrude Corless, 88, formerly of Hempstead, died Sunday, June 26, 1966, in the Rosa Villa Nursing Home, Albion, following an illness. So she died right here in Albion. Born in Albion, she lived in Hempstead for many years. She was a member of Our Lady of Loretto Catholic Church of Hempstead. Survivors include 5 cousins: Paul and Walter McFarland, both of Rochester, Mrs. Jack Whipple of Albion, Mrs. Charles McDonald of Kenmore, and Walter Richardson of Wellsburg. Friends may call at their convenience at the Charette and Mitchell Funeral Home in Albion this afternoon and evening, where prayer services will be held at 8:40. Tuesday followed by a Requiem Mass at St. Joseph's at 9 a.m. with burial at St. Joseph's Cemetery. So her obituary was also published locally. This was the obituary for her husband. T.K. Corless of Hempstead, actor on stage and silent films. Hempstead, funeral services for Thomas K. Corless of 138 Maplewood Avenue were to be held at 9:30 this morning at Our Lady of Loretto Catholic Church. Corless, a retired actor, writer, and star of the silent screen, dropped dead at his home Sunday afternoon. He was 77. He'd been seen in such silent film productions as The Bluebird and in the stage version of the musical comedy Peggy from Paris. Born in Ireland, Corless came to the United States in 1900. He revisited Ireland for the first time last year. Corless is survived by his wife, Catherine G., and his sister, Annie Corless of Dublin, Ireland. He'll be buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery. So he also is in St. Joseph's. And if you look up in Find a Grave, you will see, this was the write-up that I read to you, but up here, take a look at it, because it's him in a silent movie. It's very purplish, but it is a scene from a silent movie that he did. Yeah. Yeah, he's kind of purple, but but it was a 1920s silent movie. Yeah. So it's not going to be what we expect, but I think it's kind of cool because you can see him.
My family never mentioned any of this. I knew her as a kid.
Doesn't it?
She died in
Yeah.
my 20s.
I wish it wasn't purple.
It's different. Never. This is all a surprise to me.
That's something. Very nice. Yeah. So that is what I found out about her and her background and nationally. We had somebody who was nationally known.
I think she got more publicity than he did.
I think so.
Yeah.
And he was the actor. Yeah, but she outshone him.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions?
Sounds like she was the original spin doctor.
Yeah. She was very good at publicity.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine.
She was my father's cousin.
Oh.
And we knew none of this. I've never heard any of this.
Oh, really?
None.
I can understand.
And my family must have buried it.
Uh-huh.
Because they must have been embarrassed by it. They were kind of, they weren't reclusive, but they were on the quiet side. They didn't mention much family stuff.
That time period, too, a woman wasn't supposed to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, it was a man's world. The man did the things that were obvious, and the women stayed home and made supper.
But she was tall, and her husband was short.
Oh.
And I went through the village in Ireland where he was from. It was from Kinvara,
Uh-huh.
in County Galway, I think. and he was an actor. That's all I knew about him. Never heard anything about being in films or any of that. They must have just lost that over.
Well, now if you look for him on the internet, we can find lots of things about him. You can learn about your relative. Yeah.
Amazing.
Isn't it though?
No, not a thing about this. Never.
Wow. Well, if you want photocopies of what I've got for today, you can have them.
Yeah.
I can do that for you.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Got a place to start anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Comment? Yeah.
You know, it's interesting too, because they lived on Long Island, and Long Island back at that time, you know, it was pretty rural, but a lot of rich people.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like big wig Gatsby and stuff. And I went to college back in the dark ages with a woman, and her mother grew up on Long Island back in that time period, and her mother's family had money, and her grandparents had money, and they actually had a neighbor who had some kind of money out in that area of Long Island, and they had a lion. They actually had like a full-grown African lion on their property, and her mother was afraid to go walking when she was a young girl because sometimes they let the lion loose.
Oh,
they had a cage, so there was all sorts of like, we'll call it interesting stuff going on there, like actors and actresses and strange and
Long Island was. It was the rich people.
Right, it wasn't built up. That was after World War II when they built all that, all the housing developments. Before that, it was all wealthy people living bizarre, eccentric lives out there with, lions roaming and bootleggers coming in on boats off the ocean and stuff. So,
absolutely.
So being an actor out there was probably quite interesting.
Well, they lived in a very modest house. I was in the house just before she died, maybe a year before she died. And it was just a modest cape. So they, the silent films are long gone.
Oh, yeah.
And probably the money would run
It's long gone too.
They lived very modestly. And, but, like I said, none of us didn't know any of it.
Well, I'd be happy to make copies of them. You can toss out what you don't want and keep what you do.
Great.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, if anybody has background you want me to dig into. Mike was my experiment, so. Okay, thank you everybody for coming.